Nothing changes if nothing changes. So what happens when the world continues to change, but we don't? Where do we end up as a leader, as a team, as an organization? It's an important question to ask as change continues to happen at an exponential pace because of technology like AI. And as a result, the competitive landscape is also changing. It's changing at an exponential rate, just like consumer behavior is changing at an exponential rate as well. The challenge, however, is how we view the world around us, because our human minds view the world through a linear lens, and this creates an exponential gap. It also results with us feeling that change is hard, scary, and even painful. But here's the good news. You don't have to feel this way, and you don't have to stay stuck. In fact, one of the greatest growth opportunities for you right now, right this very moment, is to change. And there's no better time to change than now. There's no better time to transform yourself than today as you listen, after you listen to this episode of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast.
You're listening to the Banking on Digital Growth podcast.
Welcome back to the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. I'm James Robert Lay, founder and CEO of the Digital Growth Institute, where we help financial brands uncover their biggest marketing and sales blind spots so that they can quickly stop losing loans and deposits. I'm curious. Are you curious? If you're curious about where your biggest marketing and sales blind spots are right now. If you're curious about that, visit www.digitalgrowth.com/benchmarks. That's benchmarks with an S, to see how your performance compares to other financial brands. Once you schedule your 30-minute blind spot benchmark call, we're going to walk you through some key benchmark findings so that you know exactly where you have blind spots that are costing you millions in loans and deposits, because you have unseen marketing and sales gaps within your digital buying journeys. Now, joining me for today's conversation, which is part of the Exponential Insight series, is my friend Jim Marous. Jim is the CEO of the Digital Banking Report and co-publisher of the Financial Brand. He is also the host of the Banking Transformed podcast. And I'm looking forward to talking through all of the changes and transformations that Jim has made for himself over the years, so that together we can guide you along your journey of growth as a financial brand leader. Welcome to the show, Jim. It is always great to share time with you, buddy.
Hey, it's great to see you again. It's been a while. We've talked on the phone. We see each other in person, but it's been a while since we've been on screen together.
It has been, and we were in real life together all the way back in May at the Financial Brand Forum. You were leaving the room. I was coming into the room. I think we said hi, shook hands, maybe even gave each other a hug, and then it was off. You were doing your thing. I was doing my thing, and we've texted back and forth, but my goodness, so much has changed since then. And when we're talking about change, which we will be today, it's important to be mindful of what is going well, to have some gratitude, to start every day, to start every conversation with something good. And with that in mind, what has been good for you? What's good personally or professionally?
On a personal level, it's a great time in the Marous household right now because our son is getting married to his high school sweetheart. Been going together for 8 years, and looking forward to seeing family, friends, and probably just importantly, his friends and her friends, because having been together for so long, we know so many of the people that are going to be at the party that we're looking forward to that. I'd love to say I'm involved to some level to this whole wedding planning thing, but when you get into that stage, James Robert, you'll find out that the man pretty much is in charge of errands. But it's good anyway. Work is good, and I just ended up doing a quick jaunt, of all things, crazy, but I'm a big Bruce Springsteen fan, as you can see behind me, and I've always wanted to see Bruce in Wembley. And so I decided to take a trip to Europe, fly over to see Bruce at Wembley Stadium, and went there 3 weeks ago with a friend of mine from the business, actually. And at the same time we were planning this, we said, okay, what else is in Europe at the same time? And we took another flight over to Helsinki to see Coldplay, which I had not seen before. And it was an experience of all experiences. It quickly, even after the concert, it resonated me more and more. And as much as I love Bruce Springsteen, I'll say as far as the concert experience, Coldplay hit my number one spot after many, many years of going to concerts. It, from beginning to end, was just awe-inspiring, and it was a good feeling. You talk about gratitude. You go to a Coldplay concert, you're gonna have a lot of gratitude when you're done.
Yeah, music, there's nothing that I think of that brings people together more than music, because music connects with the soul. It does evoke an emotional connection. And I remember when I reached out to you for this conversation, I sent you a text because I was starting to see this pattern and trend. A lot of people are losing jobs in the industry. They're leaving the industry. Some, I mean, particularly in the marketing field, CMOs. I know two CMOs specifically that have
Okay.
left, and they've done good things. And then I'm like, well, what's going on right now? Is it the lack of respect for the role of marketing within the vertical? Is there other opportunities? Is the industry shrinking? Is it financial? There's just a lot of change. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I'm always one who's just questioning, learning. What are you seeing when it comes to all of this change?
This is where this discussion started. Why this podcast, we decided to do this discussion, is that I also seen the same thing. People being displaced not by their own volition, in some cases, being startled by the change in their lives, and trying to peel back the layers. And I think, unless you really get to know the entire picture, you may not have a single reason. But at the same time, as after we discussed, geez, what's going on, I started thinking about the people that have been in place for a very long time. I look
Mm,
at some people at big organizations that have been in marketing positions for an extraordinarily long time and said, geez, what's the difference here? There's certainly differences in the organizations that they work for and the leadership that they have. But to a certain degree, there's also a difference in the people and their viewpoint on, and a theme that we both believe in thoroughly is continuous learning.
yeah.
And not to point fingers or to say that a person continuously learned and they'll be secure forever, but I think they'll be more comfortable. And I think that's the takeaway from this whole thing, is that there are people that I know that don't spend one day without trying to learn something new about their role, their position, their life, whatever it may be. And to get caught off guard at a time like today with so many options available for learning, boy, it's a hard one for me to fathom. Not again to cast any aspersions on anybody who gets displaced, but I think the most important thing to do is make sure that if you get displaced, you have some options in your mind that you've pre-played just because.
Yeah.
It's never going to do you any harm.
No. And that idea of continuous learning, I know it's something that you invest a lot in, I invest a lot in, and that is both time and treasure, time and dollars. When we were writing Banking on Change and doing some research in the industry, one of the surprising things we found was that the majority of financial brand leaders, 70 to 80%, are spending or investing only 1 to 2 hours a week in ongoing learning. And if we get in and drill that down even further, out of that 70%, 80%, 50%, it's less than 1 hour per week. And in a time of continuous change and evolution and transformation, you look at some of the secondary research, and the numbers are leaders need to be investing a minimum of 5 hours, perhaps even upwards of 10 hours a week in continuous learning. What's your take on that when you think about just the lack of learning, to just cut to the chase? Why?
That it bothers me. Yeah, mind you, this is kind of like the way I was brought up. My mother was a teacher. My father was a salesperson that never settled for where he
Mm,
was at any point. And I think that helps a lot. But the reality is, my background. 15 years ago, I decided that at age 55, I did not want to become relevant and decided to start writing a blog about research in the marketplace that I could use to get in the door of people I was trying to sell, to make them smarter. I believe that that was one of the best decisions I ever made, but it wasn't out of the ordinary for what I was doing at the time. But what happened was That's what was the beginning of writing reports for the digital bank report, writing articles for the financial brand, starting a podcast. Every one of those content creation moments, you have to learn in order to dispense and disperse information. You think about the number of hours you spend on your podcast, the number of hours I spend on my podcast. Yes, it's to share information, but doggone it, it's not that I know what I'm talking about.
Correct.
I tell people I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I try to surround my people with people that are smarter than me in whatever field they're in. And every time I do an interview, every time I write an article, every time I do a search with ChatGPT or Google, I'm learning something. I also found a great way to walk the dog rather than just have the mind wander, is putting on a doggone podcast and listening to it. It's sometimes not even in my field. One of my favorite podcasts is certainly Gary Vaynerchuk, because I really believe in the way he looks at life, he looks at business, he looks at content. So, and there's never a time that I don't come home and say, I got to write a note to myself. I need to implement this. Or I got to double down on this, because you inherently get lazy at things that get easier. And it's good to have somebody that keeps on pushing you along. And there are so many, and this is where this whole discussion started with you and I, is it's not just about these formal learning experiences. Nobody has to start a podcast or start writing, but there are so many options to learn, to be an absorber of information. It doesn't matter if you get up 1 hour earlier or take one more mile on that dog walk. It doesn't have to go to waste. We have the time, even though time is the most precious resource. We can reallocate or double down.
Golly, there's so much to just roll back on here. You mentioned your parents.
Yeah.
Your mom was an educator. Your dad was in sales. My mom was an educator. So I grew up in a home where learning was important. My dad was an engineer. And but then also something I'm thinking about here is the role of environment and surrounding yourself with people. Like you said, you don't feel like you're the smartest person in the room. If I'm the smartest person in the room, well, damn it, I'm in the wrong room. I need to go find a room. I need to find a new room.
Yeah.
And that's something that I actually committed to back in 2017 when I joined Strategic Coach. That's founded by Dan Sullivan and Bab Smith. And Strategic Coach is a bunch of entrepreneurs from a lot of different verticals, and we meet quarterly. And we all talk about where we've been, where we're at, where we're going to go over the next 90 days. And I have tried to bring that type of thinking into the vertical because I saw a lot of value from it. I grew from it. I even had one fintech leader call me out about 12 months ago, and they shared with me, James Robert, I think maybe you might be outgrowing this industry. And I'm like, I've been pondering on that for a while, because what happens when you start to outgrow the people around you? You got to go find a new room. You got to go find, you want, at least for me, I want to be the dumbest person in the room because that means there's still something to learn. Take your story, 55 years of age, where a lot of people are, you know what? I'm on the downside of life. I'm going to check out. I'm going to retire. Well, that's not me. I'm like you. I'm like, if I'm 55, I'm wanting to double down. I want to keep doing this thing till I'm 156, for that matter. Go back to yourself. The people that you surround yourself with, like-minded people. How are you finding those people, and how are you nurturing each other to continue to level up your perspective?
Boy, great question. And what I have found in the last year, and we talked before we got on the air about gratitude and what are you thankful for? You know, education comes from unusual places and unusual situations. This year I had a spell in April and May, and many people are aware of this, that I don't think I got home for more than a 24-hour spell at any point before I was on the road again with another event, another activity. And it just so happened, and I wasn't searching out for it at the time until we got further into the tour. And at the first event I went to, I ended up having a plane flight with a friend of mine who came along halfway. So I went to Atlanta, met with this person in Atlanta. We were both going to Wisconsin. And we had one of the deepest, most thoughtful conversation that went way beyond work, but went into dynamics such as the glass ceiling. Where are we going as companies? How are we continually staying ahead of what's going on in the marketplace? And it was only a 2.5 to 3 hour flight, but we got out of the plane and said, let's go to dinner. It took another 3 to 4 hours. Then we wanted to get back to the hotel, and the bar was still open. We said, let's keep this discussion going. I went to my room that night and thought, oh my God, I've gotten so deep into the back and forth education and getting to know somebody. That was an education, because some things came to light that I never thought of. Things came to light about my life. And when I went to the next event, I ran into a gentleman in California that out of nowhere said, our paths have crossed more times than you would ever know. Do you know this person? You know this person? You know this person? And you realize the world is really quite small with all the social media and everything else going on. And we can track each other. We can stalk each other, if you will, without knowing it. My story really has to do with the fact that every one of the events I went to during this 2-month period, there was a person that I got to know better than I ever would have if I didn't think about get to know somebody different than you better than you ever would. I get to meet this woman, Sarah Martin, out of oh my gosh, Ireland. I said Israel, Ireland, who I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out what was her story. She works for a company that serves the fintech space and Pulsate. And it's interesting because not only was her business acumen just extraordinarily high, but we got along famously because we both were asking questions. We weren't trying to impress each other. We kept on asking questions, getting to know each other. And this relationship will go on to the day I die. I have no doubt, because it resonated. And that was the case in every one of these cases. So you don't have to do formal education.
No.
And that's where my dad comes out of in the whole quadrant, is that, my mother was a formal teacher. My dad was a salesperson that would ask more questions and tell people answers. He would then serve them the way they want to be served because of what they told him. And he was out there simply to please. I mean, he was very much like me, man. He loved those pats in the back and the big hugs. And sometimes that's just because you have some empathy. And I can keep on getting back to what it's like today. You have the opportunity at any big cocktail party to focus in on one person that really interests you and get to know them doubly where you would have in the past just moved on to the next person. It's not about the quantity anymore. It's about the quality, and also about the ability to get learning from so many different sources. It can come from LinkedIn. It can come from Facebook. It can come from Twitter. It can come from YouTube. It can come from X. It can come simply by doing searches on ChatGPT or one of the other generative AI tools, because your ability to get information and to learn how to ask questions right now is so invaluable.
That's an interesting point you make about getting really good at asking really good questions, because I think about your example of hacking time. You go out, you walk the dog. I go out, go for a run, but I'm doing the same thing as you. I'm putting a podcast on or a YouTube video on that's just audio only, and I'm working my body, but I'm also working my mind. And I have actually taken to Chat GPT and using Chat GPT to either ask questions along that run or walk, more the walk, because I can't actually talk and run at the same time. Talk and walk, I can do it, but if you throw gum into the mix, I'm going to fall down. Talk and run, It's just not happening. But I've also flipped it around to where I'm asking Chat GPT now to ask me questions to download my perspective and then kind of almost hear myself back. And the idea, questions, learning to ask questions. It's a very Socratic skill. And maybe there's someone who's watching or listening who feels like they just don't have the skill to ask good questions. What would your advice be to them to build that skill, to build that capability? Because if I was to project out 3 years from now with the use of generative AI, it is going to come down to those who can ask questions and those who struggle to ask questions. Those who can ask questions will get the greatest value from it. Those who struggle to ask or form a question will struggle. And when we look at forming a question or framing a question, what skills does it take to ask a really good question to begin with in the first place? Because I see a lot of leaders right now, they're dabbling with generative AI, regardless of the platform, but they're using it like a Google search from 1994. And I get it. You're having to unlearn what you have learned and relearn a new interface with technology. But what's your take on formulating really good questions?
You know, you're making me smile because so many people at the beginning of ChatGPT in October of 2022 thought it was dumb. They said, it's not giving me any more than Google does. And you realize if you play around with it long enough, you go, you know, I hate to tell you, but if you want to find out who the dumb one in the room is between you and ChatGPT, you may want to get in front of a mirror, because ChatGPT is only going to answer what you ask it. And as you get deeper and deeper, the people that have used it more and more realize the nuances of asking questions, because ChatGPT will teach you that.
Yeah.
It will give you a bad answer. You go, that's not what I meant. I wanted to sound like this person. Or, you know, it can be as simple as saying, tell me the future of banking using Snoop Dogg and a tune of his. It will give you that. But that's kind of silly.
Right.
But I also can tell you that, you know, with my podcast, I now will, before the podcast, ask ChatGPT or one of the other platforms, I'm going to be interviewing so-and-so from so-and-so of a company about this topic. And I'll tell it the topic. Please provide an introduction to the podcast and a summary to the podcast, even though it doesn't know what I'm going to say. It's just another way to get more introduction moments. Give me 5 good SEO titles and give me 10 questions I should ask my guest. It saved me immediately 2 hours of prep time. Now, I still had to look at it. I still had to format my intro, my outro, things of this nature. I still had to format my questions. But 7 out of 10 of them were going to be exactly what I would have asked. Now, if I asked that tool another 10 minutes from then, I'm interviewing somebody else from another company about the same subject, it will not give me the same questions. Mm-hmm. And if it does, then let me ask the questions again. I want to focus on this dynamic of this questioning. What is interesting is you can actually ask any generative AI tool, what question should I ask you to find out more about the future of dynamic agents in an AI world in banking? And it's going to give you a starting point.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing what's available out there. You're going to find out you still need the human aspect to say, you didn't quite get that right. I want you to go a little deeper in this. And you still have to put your personality within it. But those questions, I think we talked about it once before. If you get writer's block, the mentality of writer's block in today's world, you're doing something wrong. Because generative AI can get you unstuck very quickly.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to write about X in this tone to this audience. It may not be perfect, but it's going to give you a running start.
And I think that's the point. It might not be perfect, but it's going to give you a running start. It'll take you forward, and that might be 1 step, it might be 10 steps, but it's a matter of measuring progress. And that's the whole point of growth. You measure progress not by looking at where you're going, but you measure progress by seeing from behind where you've been and the distance that you've gained along that. And once again, I think about a lot of financial brand leaders when we were writing and researching Banking on Change. the majority of financial brand leaders feel stuck doing whatever it is that they're doing. They're not creating the space, they're not creating the time to review and to reflect on where they've been, the progress that they've made, the wins they've experienced, to have the gratitude, but also to gain perspective with lessons that they've learned. And if you think back, I mean, let's just go back to Jim Marous, 55 years old. Look back from where you're at today to when you were 55 and all the progress that you've made along the way. What have you learned? If you go back, what have been the greatest lessons that you've learned over those years?
Greatest lessons, and is applying more today than ever before, is never stop moving forward. At the end of the day, as I said, I've been humbled by the fact that there are things that people talk about today I don't understand at all, but I'm not afraid to stick my neck out and find out what they mean and how they may change over time. To always be aware that you are replaceable unless you make yourself invaluable. World, in a personal relationship or in a business relationship, is a value transfer. I think when we talk about people that have lost their jobs, which is really where the whole beginning of this conversation started, people have to ask themselves daily, am I providing value to my world around me beyond what I'm getting back? And I will add to the fact that I've realized that the way I view things is different now than it was when I was 55, and certainly different than when I was 40, from the standpoint of humility and the ability to not be fearful of falling. But if I was in a marketing position today, I know 9/10 of what I need to know to do the job. I don't know myself. Read the book by Raja Rajmanir, the CMO of MasterCard and quantum marketing, and you realize, oh my God, there's so much that I don't know. In fact, I tell people, if you got out of university, a master's program in marketing at a university 3 years ago, there is more that you don't know than you do know. That is insane amount of speed, but that's what's happening. So what do you have to do? Find people around you that can help you do better. Find those partners, those collaborators, those leaders that will make you smarter, and reach out to them. People like to be asked their opinion on things. You know this, you do this for a living. They love to be on your podcast. And there's not one that you don't learn something that you didn't expect to learn when you went in the podcast.
Absolutely.
So you have a bigger vessel. You have to get the mind open to say, okay, I got to drop something that I thought was still important that probably isn't, and put this in its place.
Well, and I think one thing you shared, going back to when reflecting on 55, and I think it's very applicable for those that feel like they are losing their jobs, they're stuck, they're struggling. You said, don't be afraid to fail. Okay, it's easier to say that, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm one who has that philosophy as well. Like, in the Lay household, I tell my kids all the time, you either win or you learn. Like, there's no failure here. You can't fail, because, well, maybe the only failure is the fact that you didn't learn something to apply to the next go around. But for someone who's watching or listening, and maybe they have lost their job, and they're like, well, that's easy for y'all to say. Like, what's been the biggest failure that you've experienced that you're willing to share? And you know what? I'll lead on this one. I'll lead on this one.
Okay, good.
I'll lead on this one. The biggest thing, and I've shared this before on the podcast, but maybe someone hasn't heard this. Go back to 2012, October 4th. October 4th, 2012, my wife comes to me and says, it's the business or the family. We had our second child 6 months before, and externally, people looked at James Robert Lay and thought, my gosh, this kid I was 30 years old, started the business 8 years before. Like, he's killing it. Life must be great. He's going everywhere. He's starting to speak, conferences, he's winning awards with, for his agency. Yeah, well, guess what? James Robert Lay on the inside was in a very dark place, because 2 years before, January of 2010, December of 2009, January 2010, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. Didn't tell anyone about it. And went down deep depression, struggled with some addiction along the way. But the good thing is that my wife called me out. You talk about surrounding yourself with people who aren't afraid to call you out. She called me out. I needed help. I called in a guy, David C. Baker, worked with other firms, other agencies. He actually worked with Tim McAlpine with Currency over the years. And David came in and he said, you know what? I think you should blow your business up and start over. I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? What am I supposed to do? He goes, that's for you to figure out. You called me in to give you the path forward. That was the path forward. And that's exactly what we did. In January of 2013, we blew the agency up. It had been a 10-year-old business. We started over. Here we are, almost a little over a decade later. And the lessons learned, we've had failures along the way, but that was not a failure. That was a tremendous lesson learned that we could apply going forward. It's like every quote unquote failure since then has been a new lesson going forward. So it was a reframe. I can't fail. I can only win. What about you, man? Like, what's been the big lesson? We reframe failure to learning.
It's interesting you should say that because, and I think if I was to turn the tables and ask you it in an unprompted way, you'd probably say, geez, there hasn't been a failure because at the end of the day, I'm still here. So it's a big hiccup, maybe. There's moments that I'm not proud of. They're very similar to you in that there was a time that I surrounded myself with people that were extraordinarily positive about me, and the ego got a little bit too big, and I put too many people around me that liked me for what I presented as myself as opposed to me. I surrounded myself with a lot of superficial friends that put my family life at risk. And I'll never forget a day that we lived in a city that had an outer belt, a freeway outer belt. I drove around the outer belt probably 5, 6 times. And it's the only time in my entire life I said, geez, I could see how this whole situation of having a lot of fictitious friends, living a life that looks better than it really is. There's a lot of internal stuff that I was doing wrong. But I said, I can see how people could commit suicide in this situation. Now, never contemplated it, never came close to it. But I got to the point of saying, I understand how this could ruin somebody. What it did, it made me rethink the path I was going down. It made me rethink my friends. I completely restructured who I consider my friends and the people I spend time with. I found those people that liked me for me, even in my worst of places, which I was in at that point. But it gave me the reality that said, don't get caught up in your own headlines. Don't get caught up in a life that looks really good, but down deep it's not real. It's built on a whole lot of fragile foundational things. And I think that the takeaway there in your situation as well, it made every challenge going forward simply a challenge. And it's used a lot of times, but if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. I'm a living example of the fact that I'm sitting here 70 years old with 2 mortgages. Nobody should have a mortgage at this age. This is where you should say it's all been taken care of. But we made some really interesting decisions in our lives with regard to where we moved to and the timing of everything. But it didn't kill us. And actually, I could very much attest to the fact that maybe that's why I'm still working. I'm still paying the mortgages, and I'm still, I'm enjoying it. And you look at the people that are about to lose their job, or read their own press clippings, thinking they're good, but they're not prepared for something that may happen immediately, that they're no longer as good. I mean, things are happening much faster than they were 15 years ago for me. And I think that every day, if I don't put in the time, the thinking time to make myself better, I'm putting myself at risk. I can be replaced by AI. everybody can to a certain degree, unless you make it human, unless you continue to expand your circle of friends in a really logical, common sense way. And as I said earlier, surround yourself with people smarter than you, and you'll never be lacking for where you can learn. There'll always be willing people to help you.
I think what is on your shirt, if you're watching, you can see it. And if not, what's on Jim's shirt, it's 2 words: banking transformed. And I think, Jim, what you're touching into is this is the heart, this is the art of transformation, of human transformation. It's continuously letting go, sometimes of what we know, so that we can go and embrace something new. And I think about a VP of marketing who recently, she did lose her job. We had been texting back and forth. She was the very first person she told me that she had lost her job. She was also the very first person about 3 or 4 weeks later that she just got a new role as a chief experience officer at a new organization that values her perspective, values the work that she's doing.
Yeah.
And when one door closes, have faith, have hope in yourself that there is going to be something bigger, better out there. Be careful, be mindful, do not get stuck in the gap, griping about problems, because you'll stay there. But with commitment and with courage, you got to keep moving forward with confidence. And on that note, Jim, as we start,
it doesn't have to be business. My journey a little bit too, on the fact that on a personal journey basis, to say, maybe just have to commit to yourself and show that you can do it. It's now 5 years ago where I was about 50 pounds heavier. I had absolutely no discipline from an intake or an output perspective. And one step at a time, I did Noom, which is an online Weight Watchers program. I'm a big, as anybody who knows me very well knows, I'm a big Orange Theory fan. I also love biking, and decided if I'm going to live, if I'm going to beat the diabetes that was on my doorstep, the only way I'm going to do is completely changing my life, changing behavior, and committing to it every day. Now, are there days that I fall down? Oh God, yes. But you realize, if I can do that, I can pretty much handle anything, because I had a whole lot of behaviors that were in the dumpster for 40 or 50 years that all of a sudden had to change around. Am I perfect? No. And that's the other thing, James Robert, we talked about too. Accept imperfection. Kind of good.
Yeah. Master the body, master the mind, master yourself. And in a time of transformation, of exponential change, keep looking to help others along the way. Jim, you've been so helpful for today's conversation. Really, it's always great to reconnect, have this dialogue, have this discussion. How can someone who's listening be like, you know what? I want to connect with Jim. If they're not connected with you yet, they want to connect with you. What's the best way for them to connect?
I say, do a search anywhere and you're going to find me, unfortunately. But to your point, and it's very important, I offer everybody, when I speak with them at a big event or anything else, if you want to shoot the breeze, please text me, email me, call me, whatever it takes, and ask. I have not turned down anybody yet. Don't plan to do it ever. Now, mind you, that's partially because very few people take me up on it. But the ones who do, you realize they had to make a big step just to do that. And, I love it because I'll be honest, I'm selfish at times. I'm going to probably learn from you as well. So if you call me about something that's on your mind, a challenge, something business-wise, personal, anything else, I guarantee you I'm going to learn from you. So I'm going to keep that conversation going.
There you go. Connect with Jim, learn with Jim, and you're going to grow together with Jim. Jim, thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. As always, and until next time, be well, do good, and be the light.